There we go.
Everyone, finally we are started. How's everyone doing tonight?
Thumbs up.
Good.
Yay. So first things first, quick couple of housekeeping items. We are on Zoom, so you all can speak and ask questions. Please feel free to speak, ask questions. If we say something that makes no sense, put a message in chat or whatnot. But please, when you're not speaking, keep yourself on mute so it doesn't get all noisy and boisterous. Also be advised, we're recording this for later posting. So legally, we have to tell you, hey, we're recording this because we're going to repost it later. Now you know. And last but not least, we're going to be showing you some clips, some videos and stuff that's really going to look good in full screen or speaker view mode, where you just see us and big visible shapes. So you're probably going to want to use that to see some of the detail and the stuff we're doing. But I think that's all for housekeeping. So I'm just going to take a moment of prayer to start us off, and then we'll dive in. Heavenly Father, we gather together virtually today to work on our skills, to work on our abilities, to work on our hearts, and also just hang out. I mean, since COVID has been going on, we haven't been able to see each other nearly as much as we used to. But God, I lift this time up to you to be a time of learning, time of companionship, and above all, just be a good time. In Jesus' name, amen. So, first, a couple of other team-related things. Of course, those of you, I think everybody here knows me, Mike Racine. I am the technical director of the team. Over here, I have Ryan Gower, camera team leader. And over there, I have Nathan and Owen. Nathan, of course, being the director of production, and Owen being one of the camera team leads. That is right?
No.
Owen's an awesome guy. There's his title. Oh, yes, that's right. You're a service producer now. For like a week, and then we stopped having services. So, because aforementioned COVID, just want to recap the COVID hygiene expectations when you're coming to work here at the hangar and whatnot. Of course, 6 feet apart or 2 meters, your choice. Hand washing when you arrive and when you leave. The when you leave part is just a strong recommendation, but when you arrive, definitely. Clean your cameras when you get to them. Obviously, if we're going to set them up, they need to be wiped down. We usually provide Lysol wipes for the tripods, for all the non-electronic stuff. And then I also have some isopropyl alcohol for actually cleaning the actual cameras themselves. Those will always be available. Ask me, Nathan, Ryan. One of us will know where they are. Another request is try and arrive at call time or before. Usually on a Thursday night, it's kind of, we try and move pretty quickly because we have a lot to do. So if call time's 6:30 and everybody's there ready to go at 6:30, then we can start faster, we can get done faster. We also ask that you kind of have an open mind about learning and new things, because none of this has been path we've blazed before. Everything's new, improvised, things literally change week to week. Nathan and I are in several meetings a week where things can go drastically different. Just changes that come up, new ways of doing things, new ideas. So we just ask you to be a little receptive to those and be ready. Change with us, improvised. Who knows what we might come out with. And also another request, because we're in a much smaller room, distractions become very more prevalent. So things like being on your phone during the sermon, it will easily distract Mike. He's kind of easily distractible like I am. But also it just kind of can cause you to miss things or whatnot. So we ask at this time especially, stay off your phone, especially during those sermons. Try not to be a distraction, because being a distraction is distracting. And last but not least, if you don't feel comfortable coming to the hangar and serving, even with the precautions, don't hesitate to talk to Nathan or Julia or myself or Ryan or anybody, and we'll make arrangements. Don't worry about it. No skin off our backs. We understand. This is kind of a sketchy time of year. And if you don't feel safe, that's okay. We have people, we can make arrangements, all is well. All right, I think that's all the notes I had. So now I will throw it over to my man, Mr. Ryan Gower.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so we're here to talk cameras, camera operation, camera techniques, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to jump right into it. First thing I want to talk about are the tripods. And our tripods have several features. Our tripods are all differently configured, but that being said, they all have a similar set of features on them. So I'm going to get my my lovely assistant Mike here to point things out as I go through them. So as we bring our camera and our tripod into frame here. First things first is you've got the tripod legs and then the tripod head. And the head is independently adjustable from the legs. And one way to do that, the way to do that, I should say, is with the adjustment, I don't know what you would call that, a handle, I guess. That handle, all you need to do is loosen that, and then that actually loosens the entire head and allows you to level off the camera independent of the orientation of the legs. So you don't need to unscrew it that far. But
if you unscrew it.
Yes, the head is actually floating on top of the legs. And so when you need to adjust it, you just need to loosen it up just enough to get the head to rotate or otherwise reorient itself until it is level. Need a hand there? Somebody got a little excited when they knew they were going to be undoing the handle here. There you go. Okay, and once Mike gets it tightened back down, on each of the heads that we have, there is a bubble level that will actually, it will actually tell you when the head itself is level versus the tripod legs themselves. Again, the legs can be set independently. You may have it, you know, in scenarios, we used to have them on the bleachers, there'd be one leg extended further than the others. But on the back of the head, once it's in focus, you will see the bubble level. There you go. So yep, that bubble level there, on one of our tripods, it is backlit. On this one, it's not. I don't know if the new ones have that or not, but we do have some new tripods coming in as part of our build out for the building, and they will have features like this as well. One other thing to point out is the quick plates that the cameras are actually attached to. They are very handy. They allow you to slide the camera onto the tripod head from the back. And once it goes through that first click, it's actually now locked on to the head. There's your click. Once it's locked onto there, if for some reason, let's say the tripod head is really loose or you didn't tighten something down, the camera won't actually come off the tripod. So you can have it go all the way down and the camera is still fine. You don't have to panic, provided the legs are tightened down solid enough. And so what you want to do when you're mounting the camera to the tripod, if you need to, is to have the head as loose as you can get it. And then you put the camera, find the balancing point. You slide the camera back and forth as best as you can until you can get it to actually balance on there. The reason for that is that way you don't have to crank down the locking knobs, and then it will allow you to move the camera smoothly and more freely if it can balance on its own when the head is as loose as it goes. To secure the camera in place, there is the locking screw, and that will take a different form on each of the tripods, but the function is the same everywhere. You just screw that plate down so that it prevents the camera from sliding forward inside of that channel. Lockdown screws themselves shouldn't be used in our case because we are literally in a dynamic situation where we have speakers that are moving back and forth. When we have the music going, we're trying to get different angles and different shots. If you have the lockdown screws on, then of course it's really hard to move the tripod back and forth or up and down, and making adjustments becomes very difficult then at that point. We do have tensioners, which are different than the lockdown screws. And then there's one here Mike is going to show, it's on the side. That would be for your vertical adjustment, your up and down. And then the other one for left and right is usually located inside the head there, right at the top. And you can tighten or loosen that to your own personal preference. Again, my preference would be to have them more on the loose side than on the tight side to allow you easier control of the cameras when it comes to panning and tilting the cameras around. When you're using the tripod, when you're using the cameras and the tripods, what I would suggest is just a 2-finger grip. You don't need to death grip the tripod to go back and forth. If you had a closed fist around the handle, that will actually give you less fine control over your movements versus if you just have a couple of fingers, just enough. You can use your fingers to help absorb the shock as you move it and keep it nice and smooth as you pan back and forth. Do we have any questions on the tripods themselves and using the tripod? Everybody's shaking their heads.
Yeah, I've got my, I don't know if you guys can see my hands up or not, but anyways. Do you see that part?
What's up, Aaron?
You do?
Yep.
Yeah. I just, one thing I noticed that works fairly well when adjusting that, as Mike just did right there, like the side to side and up and down and stuff, is to have a little bit of resistance, not a ton, just a little bit of resistance. Because if you don't have any resistance, as soon as you touch that thing, it's moving all over the place, right? And if there's too much resistance, like you already explained, you just can't move in time, or it's blotchy, or like it stutters and that type of stuff, right? So.
Yep, that's a great point. Yeah, you'll want a little bit of resistance so that you can't just kind of smack it and have the thing do a 360 on you. So you'll want to have a little bit of resistance in there, and then, but not too much, just enough that you can work it with your fingers and go back and forth. So I want to show a couple of examples here of some footage that we took, forever ago, back when we were still actually meeting in a building, and give you guys just a look at this and take a look at what's going on here. If we can go full screen with that, Nathan. No, not that one. This isn't right. This was a picture I wanted to do. So can anybody figure out what's not right with this image?
It's not level.
It's not level. That's right. So again, one of the first things you should do when you get to your station, once the camera's on the tripod, is check to make sure it's level. And then that way we will avoid situations like this where you can very obviously see that the tripod is a little tilted. Mike is tilted. Mike is perpendicular to the sign, but everybody's on a bit of an angle there.
And one other thing on that is sometimes exact perfect on the bubble level and optically level can be slightly different things. So if it still doesn't look level, it might need to be out just a hair to one side or another. And that's just an artifact of the camera's not actually being square to whatever the target is.
That's right.
But that should be kind of rare-ish here.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to, this one is a video, and let's see if you guys can call out what is not right with this video here. And it does loop, so you can watch it a couple of times if you need to.
Tripod's a little bit tight. Looked like it kind of stutters.
That's exactly right. The tripod was too tight here. It could have been there's probably a lockdown screw that was cranked tight on it. And therefore, if it's If it's a manned camera, the lockdown screws should never be tightened. If it's a static shot, that's a different case. We don't want the camera moving in that case. But if you're sitting at the tripod, manning the camera, then those lockdown screws should be released. All right. I'm now going to hand it over to my good friend Mike here, and he's going to go through some functions of the cameras and general operation.
All right. Owen, can you fly the camera back in for me? So with the cameras themselves, each camera we have is a little bit different. Once we eventually get into the building, that will be a different story. We will have a bunch of very well matching cameras. Oh, there we are. Let's move this a little bit. There we go. Now I'm not hiding behind it. So each camera is different. So this particular camera we've chosen for this because it has most of the features that most of the cameras have. Pretty much every other camera will have less features in some way. So first thing is servo zoom and manual zoom. Cameras that have servo zoom, which would be this one, plus the camera we're using on camera 2 position right now, those have servo zoom. So there's a little rocker here. You go in, you go out. You go in, you go out. This particular camera has a couple options for servo zoom. Has controls here, has controls up top, and it also has, through the remote port at the back here, a control down here that allows you to zoom in, zoom out from the tripod handle. If you can use that, by all means, please do. Otherwise, you have your choice here, and you can always fail over to the lens itself, which I'll get to in a moment. Actually, no, I will get to right now. So manual zoom, that would be this camera, that would be camera 4, the dolly camera. They have a manual zoom ring. So you grab the ring and you zoom in and out. This one, it's the middle ring because there's 3 rings. On the dolly cam and the other cam, there's actually only 2. So makes it simpler. So with the zoom, we'll cover some of the camera movements a little bit later, but you'll generally not want to vary the speed too much. You want to be consistent. If you're slow, you're slow. If you're fast, you're fast. If you kind of speed it and jerk it up a little bit, it kind of looks weird. But we'll get into actual operations of camera in a little bit later. Manual focus. We like manual focus. All of our cameras have a manual focus ring on the front. It's usually the frontmost ring, I believe, and that allows you to manually adjust your focus. Pick where you're landing. You can actually choose to have your subject in focus or out of focus, and they stay in or out of focus. If your camera's autofocusing, that's generally a bad thing. There are times and places where we do want autofocus, but those are rare. Generally speaking, it'll be no autofocus, manual focus, get your focusing camera, and then you don't have to worry about it. This camera doesn't have it, but the shoulder cam, camera 3, what we're using right now, has a button where you can actually push autofocus. While you hold it, it autofocuses, it grabs what it wants, then you let it go, and it's good to go.
The camera 2 does have that option as well.
Yeah. Yes, that is true. Both camera 2 and camera 3 have that.
I'm just wondering, did the dolly also have that?
So the dolly does not have a push focus, I believe, Nathan? No.
Okay.
It requires the lens and the body to work together, and they don't always do that.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, yes. So camera positions, we've kind of changed some of the positions a little bit from what they were. So traditionally, this has been camera 1, it still is. And that's kind of our central follow cam. So that follows whoever the lead is typically. Camera 2 position, we've made what formerly was the camera 3 camera. We kind of switched the two. And so that's kind of the other position at the back that follows. Third camera is the shoulder camera. So they're the person who gets down in at the action. And camera 4 is the dolly camera. So they're on the dolly going back and forth. Typically, they will have a dolly grip with them, somebody pushing them back and forth so they don't have to worry about doing it themselves. And so, Nathan, if you want to hit the exposure slide, Owen, if you want to come strike this real quick. And if I want to pull my monitors out, that would be great. So this lovely chart, I love it. It shows you the effects of the different camera settings. There are 3 camera settings for exposure. The top one there is aperture. When you have a high number on the aperture, you're letting in less light into the camera. Advantage of this is more things are in focus. As you open that up, you let more light into the camera, but you have less things that can be in focus at the same time. Moving down to shutter speed controls the motion blur of what you see. So if you have a really high shutter speed, which would be like 1/1000th, that means every frame is just very quick, almost no time at all. And so motion appears sharp. That's great for things like sports, photography, and things like that. Not so good for what we're doing. Typically, this will be 1/60th on our cameras and should never really change except in rare moments when we do weird stuff, but we'll let you know if that's ever happening. Down below, we have the ISO. So ISO is kind of like the digital gain, or basically turning up the brightness. The lower that number is, the better. And typically that'll go either in ISO or decibels of gain. We have cameras that do both. And typically that's just kind of the last stage of, well, the aperture is set right, the shutter set right, we need more light, or the image isn't bright enough, turn it up that way. The last one is color temperature. So with color temperature.
Before moving on, can we just go back to that one? So the aperture, the larger the aperture, the less focus, but also the more light that comes in. Is that correct?
Yes.
With the more light, the higher shutter speed that you need?
So they basically play as part of a triangle.
Okay.
So if you let more light in with the aperture, then you have to either decrease shutter speed or ISO. Typically shutter speed you can't really touch because otherwise it kind of creates some visual weirdness. So typically it's, if you open the aperture wider, then your ISO goes down to compensate, assuming you're already had a perfect exposure. If you don't have, if the image is too dark, you can open up the aperture to let more light in, leave the ISO, and you'll get ultimately a brighter image.
Okay, does shutter speed affect, like I understand it affects the blur, the motion, right? If you're shooting sports, yeah, you want a high shutter speed. But does it also affect the amount of light coming in?
Yes. So shutter speed originally was a mechanical shutter. So it would literally block exposure to the film for a certain amount of time and then would open up for a certain interval. That's where we get 1/60th. So it would open up for 1/60th of a second and then close again. The idea being is the film would be exposed for a certain amount of time and then not. So if you were exposing it for 1,000th of a second, you got a lot less light on your film, but less time passed, and so your film changed less.
Right.
If you had a really low shutter speed, like 1 second, the shutter would open for a whole second, so you'd let tons of light through, but your subject probably moved or changed in the process.
Makes total sense. Just needed a refresher on that.
And the reason we choose 1/60th of a second is because we're generally operating at 30 frames a second. Or if we're in 24 frames a second, we'll do 1/50th. It typically should be about twice your frame rate. Any other questions on that? Cool. Color temperature is also a really annoying thing if you get it set wrong. If you've ever seen a camera that looks really, really orange or really, really blue, you've seen the issue. Color temperature is generally measured in degrees Kelvin. So you heat something up to a certain temperature and it will actually glow the same color of light. So when something's 6,000 degrees Kelvin, this theoretical black box, when that gets up to that temperature, it will glow at a certain color of light. Light can be blue, light can be orange. Light's never really actually white as far as the camera's concerned. It only can sample a tiny little bit. Generally speaking, that'll be either 5,600 or 6,000 for what we're doing. You can always ask, and all cameras should all be set to the same thing. If they're not, we end up with some really weirdness going on. So, focus peaking. Actually, Nathan, can you throw over to this camera for me for a second? Just going to turn on the menus on this here. 1 second. Actually, Ryan, could you tell them a little bit about the steady shot stabilization while I'm doing this?
Sure. So some of our cameras have active stabilization. They have basically try to get the shake out of the image. If the camera is mounted to a tripod or fixed point, typically you don't want any form of stabilization on. And the reason for that is if you pan while the stabilization is on, and then you settle on your point, the image will float for a little while because the stabilization is still kind of working until it settles. And we don't really want that floating effect because then you start fighting it and nobody wins. So if you have the camera fixed to a tripod, we don't want to turn stabilization on. If, however, you're running a handheld camera, that's where stabilization really comes in handy because then your own body's movements, like the shake from your hand or whatnot, it dampens all of that out and it gives us a much more stable shot to work with. So with steady shot, you want it to be on only if you are the mounting for the camera, if it's shoulder mounted or handheld.
Cool. Nathan, if you could throw it over to this camera. So there's Mr. Ryan Gower. Now, do you see those little yellow lines on his hat? And as I kind of throw this image out of focus, no yellow lines. As I bring it in, see how yellow lines just start forming? You can just see them on top of his hat on that plant. And as I zoom or focus past, now you can see it on the sign at the back. Those lines are called focus peaking. And they are your best friends. So they let you know, okay, this is in focus, this is out of focus. And if you don't see those lines on your subject, you've probably not got the shot quite in sharp focus. And then that's not relevant, and that's not relevant. All right, let's throw it back to Ryan for image composition.
All right. So under image composition, I mean, we want to talk about aesthetically pleasing framing and shots and how to set up the case where we create a visually appealing image. So ideally what you want to do when you're framing for a speaker, let's say Mike, or we had Corinne last week, is you want to leave a little bit of space above their head. Like as you can see in the shot we have here, I've got maybe like a fist's worth of space above my own head. You don't want to be cutting the head off, obviously, and you don't want to have so much negative space that it starts to look kind of empty up top. So as you can see, Mike's head is cut off now. That would not be ideal framing for him if we actually had somebody manning the camera that's actually filming us here. If they are seated, like Mike and I are, for instance, if we had a close-up shot of Mike or myself, you would want them to kind of be on one side of the frame, maybe a little bit looking across the frame. So I think Mike is going to line a shot up here. So if I was looking, say, to an audience, to you guys here, and we go to the angled camera, that looks a little different. Let's tweak that a little bit.
Good news is I actually discovered how to fix this by accident. Try it now.
Yeah, there we go. So what you see here in terms of framing, if it was set up like this and I'm looking straight ahead right now, but there's a whole lot of negative space behind me, it just kind of looks off, right? It looks a little funny. It looks like there's something that's kind of missing. But if you have your subject right on the opposite half of the frame, so in this case it'll be the left half of the frame, looking across, it looks a little bit more natural, and it looks like there's something going on, and a little bit better in terms of that kind of framing. This applies to seated speakers. This applies to musicians when we're doing handheld work with the music team, using the mobile camera and stuff. So they should try to have them looking across the frame. And I've got some examples here we can go over. So the first one here is of Corinne. And Nathan, if you want to throw that full screen there, you can see this is kind of what I'm talking about here. There's a lot of negative space behind her, and it just kind of looks like we're missing something, right? It looks like you kind of feel compelled to want to move the camera over, like what's going on over there, kind of thing. And so what I would suggest for framing like this would be, I just kind of tweaked it a little bit, would be to frame her up more like that and have her a little closer to the opposite side so she's looking across the frame. It just looks a little bit more natural that way.
And just in case anybody sees one of their camera shots up here and is like, hey, they're ragging on me. We all do funny shots. We're not trying to single anybody out. We found some stills and use them as examples.
This was like a million years ago. I honestly have no idea who took these shots. So here's another example of a shot we've got. Mike is dead center in the frame. There's an argument to be made for not having them dead center, but I'm not going to worry about that. In this case, it's more the fact that his head got scalped. And
nice little haircut, but maybe we should leave that to the barbers.
Yeah. So moving on here, we've got this one. This one actually is okay. The composition is pretty good. There's a little bit of negative space above Mike's head. Overall, they're centered. The table is actually in the dead center of the frame, but because Mike and Corinne are on either side of the table, it's actually a visually pleasing shot in this case. Moving on, can anybody figure out what's going on with this shot here? Speak up.
It feels like it could be zoomed in a bit because of all the negative space around him.
There's too much space above his head as well. Well, there's a lot of negative space, yeah.
Yep, that's exactly it. There's a little bit too much negative. We're tilted up a little bit too high on this camera. So what I would do is I would do a shot more like that. Either zoom in a little bit or tilt it down to bring his head a little bit closer to the top of the frame.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, when you want to aim the camera at a standing speaker, you actually want to aim the center of the camera at their torso and have the head towards the upper end of the frame. That's just, it looks a little bit more natural. So here's an example of good composition again, where his head is close to the top of the frame, but not being cut off. He's also, now in the case of photos, him not being dead center is actually a little bit more advantageous, but in the case of video, of course, we move back and forth. So this just happens to be a still image.
Very quickly.
That's right. Here's another example. Leah is the subject of this shot. So the fact that our guitar player's head got guillotined is of no consequence to us. It is well composed.
Guitar player lives matter.
Here's another example of a shot that is well composed, because we've got our row of musicians kind of at the back, filling up the left side of the frame, and then we have Leah in the front to provide a bit of balance to the shot. And so this one, it was also well composed. Again, Jason, who's the closest musician there, his head is just at the top of the frame. So it's not being cut off, but the whole band is kind of the subject in this case.
Yeah, and in that case, that's one of those instances where there's kind of a little bit of extra allowance for that, because in order to fix that shot while still having your kind of row of musicians, you'd actually have to get the camera physically up higher. But if you're on a shoulder rig, that's almost impossible to do and have it look good.
That's right. I've got another example here. This one is decent. If I had one nitpick to do about this, I would probably pan the camera to the right a little bit and reduce the amount of negative space that's behind Tyler.
Looks like somebody's sneaking up on him.
Yeah. You like when you see shots like this in the movies and stuff, there's always, you kind of get that sense that something is going to jump out, right? Something's going to come from behind. Or when you get those kind of shots where something seems restricted on one side or the other, that it just, you feel like something's going to come up.
Yeah, and I mean, once you kind of start putting thought into this kind of camera work, you'll start seeing it in movies all the time. You'll see, hey, that composition sucks. How did that make it to TV? Or you'll see, really great, beautiful shots, and you can see, yeah, they bounce that off that. There's good headroom, there's good negative space. You'll start seeing it once you actually start thinking in camera ways.
Yeah.
I can never watch a movie the same way again.
And so this one, there is something going on with it. It's not, the tripod's not level, but I don't know how well it's going to translate over the Zoom meeting, but see if you guys can kind of figure out what's going on with this one. Anybody have any ideas?
It might be, I'm going to go without a focus, but I'm not sure.
Aaron is on the ball today. That's exactly right. Focus is a little bit soft, and we have seen some of this actually recently filming here at the hangar, where some shots, they seem okay, but they're actually not quite in focus. That's where that focus peaking is a really useful tool. Because in this case, I mean, we had to use it. This is a screenshot from whatever our recording was that went live for that particular week. But yeah, Mike is a little bit out of focus, just enough to be a little soft to where it could be passed if you're watching on a small screen, but as soon as you get to the big screen, you'd notice it.
And one rule of thumb is every time you change your distance to the subject, or you change your zoom length, zoom in or zoom out, you need to refocus. We have one camera that can zoom without changing focus too much. And even then, it still needs to be focus checked when you get to your destination. We don't have any lenses that will do perfect, stable focus throughout their entire zoom range.
All right. So anybody have any questions on image composition specifically before we move on? No? All right. Tim, you've been awfully quiet. Anything from you? Any questions?
Nope, all good right now.
All right. All right, I want to move on now to subject tracking. So this is a fun subject, pardon the pun. The camera should have motivation to move. So when you're following, let's use Mike as an example, Mike Manis. When you're following him back and forth, of course, you want the camera moving to follow him. If your subject is not moving, the camera shouldn't be moving. You want to make sure that the subject never leaves your frame, of course, but we also want to give the subject enough room to move within the frame a little bit if it calls for that. So to that end, I want to show some more sample videos here taken from way back when. So Nathan, you want to go full screen here? So this first one is a case where a camera operator was really working hard to make sure Mike stayed in the center of the frame. So you'll see that he doesn't move a lot within the frame, but the camera makes a lot of small adjustments left and right to make sure Mike stays in the center. And this can actually be more distracting than it's helpful, because there's just a lot of extra motion going on here. You see every time Mike kind of makes one of his big steps one way or the other, the camera is locked right on him, keeping him center of the frame.
And this whole time he's been in basically one frame, but the camera's been moving.
Yeah. So this next one is a good example of your subject staying within the frame, but the camera not needing to move here. So we've got Dave on the screen. And Dave specifically, he's pretty good. He's got his own set of boundaries. And so as a camera operator, once you find those boundaries, you can kind of keep your camera set up relatively static, and Dave won't leave the frame in general. So here, this is actually a lot easier for the viewer to track him back and forth because the camera doesn't have to follow him. And then the camera's not making a lot of small adjustments to try to keep him in the frame. And I've got another example. This one, it's the same idea. I do know who the cam op was here. It was Aaron. Shout out to Aaron. He did a great job with this close-up shot here. Corinne was just kind of shifting her weight back and forth, but he was able to keep her in the frame. And I just wanted to bring this up too because I really like the look of this shot. I love the hair light and the shoulder light that was on there, and then the set design in general. So
shout out to Nathan on that sweet lighting, eh?
That's right. So I have a fun little, I call it the Christmas colors image here. And so the point of this image is to give you an idea when you have your frame set up. If your subject is in the green zone, you don't need to necessarily pan the camera left or right. But as they start to get to the red areas, that's when you want to start moving your camera in order to follow your subject, whether they're moving left or right. But as long as they're in the green zone, you can let them walk within that, and you don't necessarily have to be following them all the way every time. So I've got another example here of, let's see if we can figure out, yeah, this is a case where the camera operator is letting Mike actually travel within the frame here. So he only moves when he absolutely has to. It's an example of that green zone and red zone kind of scenario where you see he's kind of shifting his weight back and forth. He's not leaving the frame, so the cam op doesn't actually need to make any adjustments there. This next example, let's see if you guys can see what happens in this one, see if you can figure it out.
Went off screen.
Oops. She went off the screen, that's right.
And note that the band is still going and nothing has changed.
Yeah. So this is more an example of we have to be paying attention, making sure that our subjects are in the frame at all times.
And that one's actually a switcher thing too, because if that was still live, means A, the camera wasn't following and the switcher wasn't switching off.
That's right. Okay, I've got another fun one here. This is another case of the cam op should have been paying attention because Mike was able to walk all the way from the right-hand side of the frame to the left-hand side of the frame, and the cam op didn't do anything about it. He had a whole lot of opportunity.
And especially for those kind of shots, like I love establishing shots. But if your subject walks in, once they're in, if they go to get out, you kind of have to follow them, especially right now where we're not switching live. You might be my only usable camera shot. So you kind of got to follow and track the best you can.
All right. And finally, I have just a few definitions here for terms that that we used regarding camera movement.
And you guys thought you were out of school right now.
That's right. Online school is still in session. So we've got pan, tilt, zoom, and dolly. And so those definitions all refer to different movements of the camera. So panning is swiveling the camera left and right. Tilting would be to point the camera up or down. Don't mind the typo in there. And then zooming would be to increase or decrease the magnification of the subject. Like we all know what zoom means intuitively, but that is actually what it means. And then to dolly the camera would be to physically move it. And we do use a dolly now, so that's why I did include it. Dollying forward, dollying in and out, dollying left or right. That is how that works. So I'm going to demonstrate some of that here. So Nathan, if you want to go to the, cut the other camera. So if I asked Mike here to pan to the right, he would pan to his other right, and now he's panning left. So that is panning. And if we wanted to tilt up to get that sign in the background, there we go. That would be a tilt up and then a tilt down. Zooming, so if we want to zoom into the sign, do that. And check your focus after you do your zoom, just like Mike referred to earlier. And then let's zoom it back out. And so let's say we wanted to get the camera closer to me, but we didn't want to zoom in, we wanted to dolly in. That would be to physically move the camera. Now this would be a case where if the camera was on wheels, or perhaps, you know, you could use the term, I guess, dolly in if it was shoulder mounted as well. But then what you would do in that case then is you would want to physically move the camera closer to your subject as opposed to using the zoom. And so, are there any questions on those definitions and those terms?
No, but I do have a question on the dolly. Is that going to be something in the new building as well? Whether that's up high and maybe some kind of dolly across the screen or the stage, or?
That is the plan currently, is to have a dolly or...
Yeah, so we're actually going to have 2 potential dolly positions, but we'll use probably only one of them at a time. And those will actually be built right into kind of the sides of the auditorium. So there'll be place for a camera dolly, tracks, and a place you can go back and forth. The seating is actually removable in those areas. So we can actually take the chairs out, put the dolly in, and use it.
Are we going to get something like in the NFL with that overhead thing that goes up and down?
3-wire cam?
Yeah. Nothing like that?
Yeah, maybe.
It could be there one day. Okay.
Yeah. The challenge with those is, while a camera to put on it wouldn't be too terribly expensive, probably about $500-700, the actual rigs themselves, if they're reasonably good quality, are easily 10, 15, 20 grand. So,
Craig, do you have a question, or you just hold your hand up?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I got a question. That's why I got my hand up. Obviously, we don't use the hand signals like in this close knit thing that we're doing now. But Mike, you usually do like focus and like you do hand signals, and I was just wondering if you could like go over those.
Sure. So Ryan, if you could narrate through them, and I will demonstrate.
Yep, absolutely. So if we need to check your focus, Mike does this. That's right. If we need you to zoom in tighter, let's go in, and to zoom out would be to zoom out. If you need to pan left or right, tilt up or tilt down, up, down. And if you need to, that's right, smack your head. I don't know what that one means.
Get him in the frame.
Make sure he's in the frame.
Too much negative space above the head.
Oh, yes.
That's a great one. Yeah, there you go.
And guys, are we going to be using, or are we going to be using stage right and stage left? Or are you going to say right, we actually physically go right and physically go left?
So if I'm directing you with stuff to move around the physical space, it'll generally be stage left, stage right. For those of you new to stage directions, it's the world from the performer's perspective. So somebody standing on stage facing out, their left or their right. If we're talking camera directions though, the only time I'll use stage directions for that is if I'm directing you to the guitar player on stage right or the guitar player on stage left. Otherwise, if it's just like move left, move right, that's camera direction. So that'll be your right, your left.
Great, thanks.
All right, so that's pretty much everything that we had planned. If you guys have any questions, I mean, we'll continue to take them.
Hey, Nathan, can you pop up the chat? Looks like there's one message in there. I'm not sure if it's something important.
Julia was giving tips.
Oh, good tip.
Good tip. All right, then. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll leave a moment here for smart remarks, and then we'll end it.
I got one thing. Are you going to show anything about formatting a disk or changing anything that you want us to change, or will you guys automatically do that for us?
So as much as possible, I'm going to be trying to do, formatting cards and a lot of the prep before you guys get here, just to make it easier so you guys can just walk in, clean your camera and go. One of the reasons why I don't necessarily want to show, things like that is that it's literally every camera we have does it entirely differently. So I could show you how to format a card on this camera really easily. But then it's different for the camera we're actually using now, or the dolly cam, or shoulder cam. They're all totally different. That will not be the case always, though. One day we shall have matching cameras. Stay tuned.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Funny stories?
I'm just wondering if there's any way we can fix the shifting of the dolly, because when we're doing the service, it gets really annoying to like shift it every now and then.
So you're talking the wheel alignment. That would be a Nathan question.
Yeah, there might be some options we can work with there. The biggest problem with, obviously we have a wheel dolly with nice pneumatic tires, nice big pneumatic tires, a lot bigger than I was thinking we were going to use, which is awesome. But like professional Hollywood dollies frequently will run on a track. So it's two pieces of steel or aluminum, and they're laid on the floor and they stay parallel, and it just keeps you on. It's just like a train. Unfortunately, because our dolly is homebrew, we don't have that option. Well, we could probably retrofit that option, but I'm not going to make more work for Nathan than actually Nathan. It's fun because he's not on mic, so he can't actually respond. But yeah, that's something, especially with the building, we might look into, is getting a set of tracks so we can just kind of stay perfectly on that. For now, we'll just have to kind of readjust every now and then.
Couldn't we just make the tracks out of like PC pipes and then put the camera on like a little cart and just put on the little remote control or something?
We could. The big challenge you run into there is with the wheels that you put on the track. They have to be concave, so it'll fit over the shape of the pipe. And wheels that do that naturally are not particularly cheap. Well, the ones that roll nice enough to be used in camera work are not that cheap.
Ew.
Yeah, the trick there, of course, is you don't want any vibration to be translated up through the wheels into the platform the camera's on.
Good to know.
Anybody else with any questions or comments? All right, then. We're pretty much right on an hour here. So we'll end it here. Thank you guys for joining us.
Well, hold on then. I thought there might be more, so I wasn't asking. But since this is it, I just want to ask, what happened? What was the deal with the drum cam? What happened there? It was out of commission for a while. Did we get a completely new cam? Did it get serviced? Like, what was the deal? What happened?
So the drum cam right now, my handy dandy little GoPro there, it doesn't like to reliably talk to our ATEM switcher through the converters. I think the micro HDMI port on it may be damaged, but one of the advantages we have right now, at least for the next little while, is we're recording locally on the cameras, so it doesn't need to output. So I've been taking advantage of that fact the last 2 weeks, I believe, to get the drum cam back into commission, because it really does add. But that involved me playing with things and testing and finding out the actual camera itself, fine and dandy.
Okay, cool.
And currently actually working on another stationary camera, which will be potentially a keyboard camera. So that'll be fun. Anyways, I think we'll, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all very much for coming, and those watching later, we appreciate you. And we'll see you some Thursday coming up, hopefully.
Thanks, guys. Great job.
Yeah, excellent job.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. It's awesome.
Take care,
Bye,
guys.
guys.
Bye, guys.
Have a good one, guys.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.